Okay, so welcome everyone. I am so thrilled to see such a great turnout for tonight's panel chat on all things heart health. And as you'll have seen from some of my emails and some of my posts, this is an area that really, I just think we need more awareness to be brought to it and more conversations around it, just so we're aware of, we're thinking about our hearts. Certainly, my dad died of an aneurysm and he had heart issues beforehand. And I guess I probably always thought about heart health. Automatically, I think about men. Certainly over the last few years that has changed, and I am more aware of it in relation to women's health, but I've become even more aware over the last couple of the last year probably. So it was due to that and just research I was doing that I really just wanted to kind of just arrange an information session like tonight where we
I didn't
can
give me the dinner, no.
where we can just get more discussion around it and more awareness. So I'm thrilled to be joined by three fantastic women from Croi, which is the Cardiac and Stroke Foundation based in the West. Madeleine Rabbit, who is a passionate nurse and advocate of all things heart health, and Aisling Harris, who is a registered dietitian and very passionate about heart health. I think everyone here tonight is. And then we also have Dr. Lisa Hayes, who's a health psychologist and is the head of the health programs at Croi. So tonight we'll be kind of going between the three experts who will give us their insights into heart health. And the most important thing out of this session is that, you know, practical, as I always say, I love practical advice and tips, but it's really to just talking about lifestyle, talking about the things that we can do to really make sure we're looking after our heart health. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to put them into the chat and I will I'll bring them up as you know, maybe if I can throughout, or hopefully at the end we might have some time for questions. So just to remind you again, if you can keep yourself on mute, would be great, just so it doesn't impact the sound for anybody else. That would be fantastic. I'm just going to quickly make sure we're all on mute at the moment, which I think sorry, I think I have us all there. Yeah, so just if you can just keep an eye on your mute, that would be super. Okay, so heart health, so let's get into it. So I have lost Madeleine from my main screen now, so sorry, let me go and find her. So Madeleine, would you just chat us through, okay, the statistics for one that we've talked about. Can you just talk us through those more and just, you know, high level, what is cardiovascular health?
Yeah, great, Catherine. So the statistics, and as you had said there earlier, 1 in 2 Irish women will die from cardiovascular disease. And it's as high as 7 times more likely for women to die from cardiovascular disease than we are from breast cancer. So it is the global cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for women globally, which is kind of something, as you said, that most people are shocked to hear, because we, even as women, think there's other areas that we start looking after much faster than we do looking after our heart. So the most thing we need to understand, first of all, is what is cardiovascular disease before we can understand cardiovascular health. So cardiovascular disease incorporates 3 things come under the umbrella. It's heart disease, peripheral vascular disease, and stroke. So those 3 areas fall into the area of cardiovascular disease. So it affects our heart, it affects our circulation, and it can affect the brain. So atherosclerosis is a word that you'll hear, and atherosclerosis is like when plaque beds down in blood vessels. So when a buildup of plaque occurs in the vessels, causing them to narrow, causing them to become less elastic, to constrict, and then you're going to have problems with your blood flowing through the body, and naturally blood can pool where you have those narrowings, which can cause a clot, and a clot like that to the heart could cause a heart attack. A clot like that to the brain could cause a stroke. So like everybody had said there earlier, and I saw one or two came up in the chat, I always never thought of it for women, I always thought of it for men. Traditionally, we would have all viewed cardiovascular disease as a man's problem, and it was low risk for women. But we've known for a long time that that has equaled out. The risk for men and women is the same. We all need to understand what cardiovascular disease is, and we all need to understand how you manage your cardiovascular health. And one of the things, because I know there's lots of, like everybody's saying about the statistics, and they were shocked and everything. If you only walk away with one statistic from tonight, it is the fact that it's 80% preventable. So there is, even though the statistics are stark, there is a lot that we can do about it. And I suppose that's why a forum like this is good to come together, because we're looking at not so much the disease, but our own cardiovascular health, preventative cardiology, the things that we can put in place to reduce our risk going forward.
And I think that is a key part of it, isn't it? You know, in terms of like that's the good news. And I think that's what we really want to kind of focus on. The awareness part of it is, you know, as we say, those statistics, but then it's kind of the fact that there's so much we can do around it. One big thing that I think if we could just draw attention to is the difference between the symptoms of a heart attack for a man versus a woman, because could we just chat about that for a minute?
Yeah, and we can. And exactly as I said earlier, traditionally we thought it was more male orientated. Now we know it's more equally female orientated. For men, they may get their symptoms a little bit earlier than women. Women tend to, from 50 plus, our risk starts to rise. And that has to do with natural aging. It has to do with the menopause. Our hormone protection has dropped. So we do also present then in a different way. So traditionally, again, you're looking at a heart attack, you're looking at the images that we would have all seen TV-wise, which is that sudden, dramatic, the clutching of the chest. You can have that chest discomfort, that pressure and tightness. Of course, that can be there. You also have that running from your jaw to your arm. We all know that type of symptom. But for women, it can be a lot more subtle. Women can have things like heartburn, dizziness, cold sweats, unusual levels of fatigue and tiredness. And they may even have like a nausea, vomiting type symptoms. So you'd say they're very similar to lots of other things that you can have, but it's the persistent. If they're lasting that persistent length of time of those symptoms, you need to check them out. And I think one really important thing for women is also not to be afraid of false alarms. You know, we need to present, if you do have these symptoms, they are common symptoms, they are similar to other, you know, you can have an indigestion that naturally just turns out to be an indigestion or a reflux, but it can be something else. So it's important that we present ourselves with those symptoms and don't leave them to linger, because it's much better for it to be a false alarm than to be a late diagnosis.
Yeah. And when you say that, you know, if you're experiencing those symptoms, is it that, are you experiencing them intensely over like a day, or are you experiencing them over a couple of weeks or a couple of months?
Yes, if they're starting to build with you and they're sticking with you, if you've had those symptoms and you know you're coming on your 20-30 minutes and there's no relief for them and they're building, then that's important that you check that out. Okay. There's an excellent actually little clip on YouTube that Elizabeth
I'm going to share that.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Because it really shows Elizabeth Banks, the actress, did a little piece and it's called It's Just a Little Heart Attack. And it's well worth it because she's juggling, it shows her kind of juggling 10 different, you know, balls in the air at the one time, and she's ignoring all of her own symptoms. And so it's well worth viewing it, because it just shows you how it's inconvenient that so we don't prioritize ourselves. And it is really important to listen to your body, listen to the symptoms. If they are lingering, then to seek help. As I said, a false alarm is much better than a late diagnosis.
Yeah. And what about then, like when you mentioned the cold flush and so forth, you can get cold flushes in menopause. So, and like some of those symptoms, like, heart palpitations and fluttering, etc., the bit of that feelings of anxiety, they're all very common in menopause. So is that where you're kind of saying it's okay to have, it may not be something more?
Yes, and it's the sustainedness of the symptoms. If the symptoms are persisting, I mean, what I would say, if they're coming and going like that, the best thing we can possibly do is keep a symptoms diary. So at least when you're going to the GP, you're going with the symptoms diary, you're looking at the length of time that they lasted for, you're looking at the kind of patterns between your symptoms. So you can sit and not just singularly focus it on one thing, look at it from the broader aspect and see, it could be this or it could be this, and have a full thorough checkup to outrule any cardiac involvement.
Okay, yeah.
Because and that is the difficult thing, is that there are symptoms that also occur, as you said, with menopause and with other conditions.
Like with thyroid, and if you're really anemic and low iron, you can also get kind of palpitations and so forth. So that's kind of
like fatigue.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. Particularly with either of those illnesses, you can get that. So it's kind of that's where the blood work and everything is so important, because you can kind of rule out that there isn't anything else going on. What about when you then go to your GP and you do your blood work? The things that we often hear about are, the blood work and the ECG. Are those the kind of standards that's taken, or is there other tests to be aware of?
So as we were saying earlier, that cardiovascular disease is 80% preventable. So there are things that we can do. And one of the most important, two. Firstly, is to be aware of it, be conscious of our cardiovascular health, but then to actually do something about it. You want to make sure that you're having your regular checkup. At least, if you've no other underlying conditions or any other reason to go to the GP, that you're going at least once a year, having your blood pressure checked, having your cholesterol checked, having full bloods taken. If they feel, and you've brought your symptoms diary and they feel the need to do an ECG is readily available in most GP surgeries now. So that's just a little tracing of the heart. But even the basics of sticking with your blood pressure and having your good full cholesterol screen is so important, because the hard part of this is these are strong risk factors that are in our control, but we won't know unless we check them, because blood pressure is completely symptom-free. That's why blood pressure is known as your silent killer, is because blood pressure is really just the pressure that the blood flows through the body. So if you imagine it flowing around, we want it to flow smoothly, caress through the blood vessels and meet all the target organs nice and gently. If we're under pressure, it's not flowing gently, it's pounding. And that can happen because of that narrowing we talked about earlier within the blood vessel. So if we have that pounding flow through the blood vessels, naturally it's hitting the kidneys. That's not good for the kidneys. It's going to hit the back of the eyes. That's not good for the back of the eyes. But you yourself don't feel any different with it. You yourself can walk around with quite a high blood pressure and feel completely symptom-free. So one of the best things we can do for ourselves is to just make sure at least once a year is to get your blood pressure checked. But I would say even opportunistically. Often you can check your blood pressure in the pharmacy. You can check it if you're up for something completely different at the GP. It's very simple. It takes 5 minutes. Get them to check your blood pressure for you. Sometimes at work events, they'll have blood pressure checks. So opportunistically have your blood pressure checked, but definitely at least once a year. And it's the same with cholesterol. It's not going to make you feel any different, but over time it's building up. And we can control a certain amount. A certain amount is inherited, but a certain amount we can control. So if we're having our cholesterol checked, what I would say is ask your GP for the results. You want to see your total cholesterol, which is your overall cholesterol that you always hear the messages about. We want that to be less than 5. And then you'll have a breakdown of your good and your bad cholesterol. So your LDLs, and we'd like to see that less than 3. That's your bad cholesterol. That's what we'll say can build up that plaque within the blood vessels. We're trying to keep that low. So you'd like to see it less than 3. And then you have your HDLs, which is your good cholesterol, which is, we want that to be nice and rich in the bloodstream, because if we can get a nice HDL above 1, it'll help us to bring down the LDL. So in some ways, I kind of think of it like a pipe cleaner. If you get your HDL rich in the blood, it'll flow through the blood vessels, mop up the excess of the LDLs and take it to the liver to break it down. So it's a balance. And Aisling will be talking about diet, and diet can have a big impact on your HDL and your LDL. But again, you won't feel any different unless you have those simple tests done regularly. And you can watch it then slowly. If your cholesterol's coming up slowly, you might be able to say, oh, you know, I know I've been overindulging in this, that, or not doing enough of another. And you can look at it, try it, check it again 6 weeks later, and you can see the impact that that is having on it. So it is, there's so many things that are out of our control. It's good to have something that you can really, once you understand it, you can take a little control of. And cardiovascular health is something that we can take a little bit of control of ourselves.
And I think I love what you're saying in relation to, you know, those annual blood tests. I'm always going on to women about just get into the habit, you know, particularly from 40 onwards. I just think, and I'm like, you know, I'm probably a complete nerd, like, but I keep a copy of my bloods because I've hypothyroid. So I'm always watching my thyroid, and just so I understand it. But I think it's really beneficial to understand your blood work. And, you know, so it's kind of just, you can then see what's happening with your cholesterol and understand the kind of the figures, right? Because it's your body. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's very important. And then at least you have some kind of control. You know what you can do yourself. And if that isn't working and medication is an option, it's an easier, if you, a blood pressure tablet, a cholesterol tablet, they tend to be for life. So, but if you've already invested in that, understand it, if it comes that you've tried everything and you do need to start a tablet, there's a greater chance that you're going to take that more regularly and get the full benefit from it, because you've already have a much better understanding of why you need it, and that you know what you can do to try and play your part in keeping those levels down.
Yeah. Just some questions here. I'll just go through them. Is cholesterol ratio more important than individual readings? It's the overall, it's the total cholesterol is the key, isn't it? Is that right?
The total cholesterol, the ratio is good because that's exactly what I was talking about. We want that balance between your HDL and your LDL. So the general public message that we give is always on your total cholesterol, what you mentioned there, Catherine, and that's your TC is what it'll often be reported as. So that's what you want, less than 5. But the ratio is about getting the how much HDL, because HDL is the good cholesterol and it has protective values. And if we can get that nice and high, it will help to bring down the LDL. So if you're really getting into the readings, then the ratio comes into it. But even if you just got, if you didn't, you know, kept it simple and just knew your total cholesterol, your HDL and your LDL, if you knew those numbers and you monitored those numbers, that's plenty to keep an eye on it.
Yeah. And just one here. What if you already have cardiac disease? I think I think that's probably might be just. Is that just the comments there? But I guess we'll kind of talk about that when we move on and talk about
and the numbers may change for them. They'll have their cardiac consultant, and they, of course, these target numbers that I'm giving you, like the 140/90 for blood pressure, they are the general public. If you're in cardiac care under a consultant, they may set kind of tighter targets or different parameters for you because they have a bigger, more holistic picture of your health.
Okay.
They are debts on the outside.
Sorry, is someone on mute? Can you just check there? Oh, Lord.
Even though his father,
sorry, let me just try and get this on mute. Okay, it's gone now. And sorry, just another one. Can we reverse that plaque build-up if it's already there?
There is, you can reverse a certain amount of it from a cholesterol perspective, yes, if we really target it. And that's what I was saying, if you know your results and you take 6 weeks and you know how to target your cholesterol, which tends to be a diet and exercise, Again, as Aisling will talk more to the diet side, but yes, you can target that cholesterol and try to reduce it. Now, of course, with all risk factors, we have some risk factors that are in our control and some that are outside of our control. So some people will have a genetic predisposition to having a high LDL, and then that can be much harder to reverse. And then that's where medication generally comes into play, that you wouldn't be able to reverse it to levels that are low enough to be considered protected.
Right, okay. And sorry, just another one. My cholesterol was up, and also bad cholesterol was up in January compared to last July. Should I get blood tests again in 3 months or 6 months? How often would you look to get them repeated?
So it depends, because they might do a plan with you. If you've started on medication, if they decided straight away and they started you on a statin, they generally will do them 6 months later. If you are somebody who's trying to target it yourself and see how much of an impact you can have on it yourself through diet and lifestyle, 3 months, 3 to 4 months should start to show you at least that it's starting to go in the right direction. So it's really a conversation with the GP, kind of what plan that you're working on, depending on what your original levels were. How high they were, how long they'd leave you.
Yeah. And there's a similar question there. And also just to read out this question. My cholesterol is always high and I didn't want to go on medication. Asked for referral to a cardiologist, got a scan last summer which showed my high cholesterol is not causing any harm to my heart, so no need for medication at the moment. I would urge everyone not to automatically go on medication, investigate the issues yourself. I guess that is, part of it is working with your GP, your consultant, and just making sure you're following their guidance.
And I suppose that the GP or the consultant won't look at it as a standalone. Obviously, it's a building of your risk factor. So it's looking at the whole, cholesterol on its own isn't a sole risk factor. But if you've cholesterol and you've blood pressure, if you're finding it hard to maintain, a healthy weight and you're overweight, that's going to add an extra risk factor. If you're a smoker, that's another risk factor. Again, like I said, then we have the ones that we can't control, depending on our family history. Different ethnic groups have different prevalence towards cholesterol. There are certain things, aging, as we age, they'll look at your overall medical background to see. So it really, it isn't a one-off standalone. We look at all of the risk factors together.
Yeah. I guess it's like anything to do with our health, isn't it? It's bringing the whole everything together, the physical symptoms, emotional, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Okay, I think just given the interest of time, there's a lot more questions there, and we might just see if we've time in a few minutes to go back. I'll answer some in the chat. There's some I have the answers to, but I'll just move over to Aisling now. And sorry, lost Aisling again, so I can spotlight her. There you go. Sorry, 2 secs. Here we go. Hi, Aisling. How are you?
Hi.
So Madeleine mentioned a lot about food and nutrition and how important that is. Do you just want to talk to us a little bit in relation to, why food is so important and how it can kind of influence our heart health?
So, like Madeleine mentioned, two of the main risk factors that we have control over in relation to heart disease are blood pressure and cholesterol. And they're also two things that our diet and nutrition can play a big influence on. So the first one being cholesterol. Our body makes its own cholesterol. So we need it for a lot of different things, from hormones to vitamin D to our cell membrane. So it's really important, but our body will regulate how much it makes. And it often produces more in response to our diet. So one of the things that if we eat a lot of, it will raise our cholesterol, is saturated fat. So people might have heard in the past that for heart health, it's better to follow a low-fat diet. And that's not true. We want to get a good balance of good fats versus bad fats. So the fats that we should eat less of in order to reduce that LDL, that bad cholesterol, would be the fats found in things like red meat, fatty cuts of meat, butter, processed meats, any kind of fried foods, takeaways, pastries, anything deep fried, things like that. Doesn't mean we can't have these foods again, but we want to reduce them because that will help reduce that LDL cholesterol, which is going to start building up in our arteries, and that starts to build up from a very young age. So we want to keep that LDL cholesterol as low as possible for throughout our whole life. Then there are other foods that can help lower the cholesterol as well. So cutting out the bad fat, but introducing more of the good fats. And the good fats would be more plant-based fats like your olive oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, avocado, nuts, seeds, flaxseed, oily fish, those sort of things. They're very good fats. They can help replace some of those bad fats. So including more of them in the diet is going to be very good for cholesterol. Other things we can do is include more of a type of fiber called soluble fiber. And a good example of this would be in porridge. So when you make your porridge, it will form a kind of like a gloopy, spongy kind of texture. When that goes into your intestine, it can help remove some of that LDL cholesterol and help lower it. So things like porridge, barley, beans, lentils, chickpeas, fruits, these can all help lower cholesterol. So there's a couple of things we can do with diet to control cholesterol as a risk factor. Same then for, oh, Catherine.
Sorry, I just had myself on mute there. Just one thing, just to mention, you mentioned about olive oil, and this is one area I'm a bit obsessed about olive oil, and I've done interviews with, there's an olive oil sommelier here in Ireland, and just one thing, like it's so important, isn't it, the quality of the olive oil that you're actually ingesting, because many of them can be blended and they can maybe just not be as good as kind of an extra virgin olive oil that's sourced from one country without a mix of olives from different countries. So it's just really important to kind of, I would just say, just look at the label when it comes to extra virgin olive oil. And I cook with it, but when you cook with extra virgin EVO, like that's kind of, as they call it, you're cooking at a really low heat, because if you start any bit of heat coming up, then it kind of takes the nutritional side, right?
Yeah, so it can only, some different oils have a different smoke point, so they can change their chemical structure. So extra virgin olive oil, excellent on kind of salads and cooking raw. Then you can use other oils, even like your rapeseed oil, which is grown in Ireland. Another heart healthy oil can withstand much higher temperatures. So if you're stir frying or at the high temperature, rapeseed oil might be a better choice. The two that I'd say to avoid would be things like coconut oil and palm oil. They have a much higher concentration of saturated fat, even though they're a plant, much higher concentration of saturated fat, so worse for cholesterol.
Okay, yeah. And if you look at, like when you mentioned meat earlier and so forth, in an ideal world, and I know there is, like, definitely, I think a lot of people are becoming more conscious of reducing meat intake and, moving more towards a plant-based diet. Ideally, do you think, is that where we should be looking if we're kind of showing some high risks in relation to our heart health? Or is it, can you get a happy medium?
You can certainly get a happy medium. The new European Society of Cardiology guidelines, actually one of their recommendations was that we should move towards a more plant-based diet. That doesn't necessarily mean a vegetarian or a vegan diet, but exactly like you said, reducing our red meat intake to kind of once or twice a week, more lean meat, kind of chicken, turkey, certainly more fish, but one of the strongest recommendations was more protein sources, or sorry, more plant-based sources of protein. So your beans, lentils, chickpeas, which we tend, from my experience anyway, we don't really tend to use a lot of in Ireland, even though they're such a simple, versatile, cheap source of protein. Great for lowering cholesterol, great for the gut microbiome, really, really heart healthy food. So certainly can be a balance without going fully plant-based.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's probably just a bit about it's having kind of that awareness, isn't it? And just kind of just trying to change the habits. And just for in relation to menopause, just to mention too, protein is a big part of your diet in menopause. So it kind of it's helping the heart, and it's also kind of helping your menopause journey as well. So yeah, I'd kind of keep those high on the list. And plant-based, as you mentioned, like beans. I mean, you can include beans in like I use all sorts of beans: red kidney beans, black beans, chickpeas, butter beans, you name it.
Lovely.
You can get very creative with the mashling, can't you? When you kind of
For sure,
think
when you
outside the
kind of
box.
experiment. And I think the
Yeah.
easiest, like your red kidney beans, if you usually make spaghetti bolognese or chili, thrown in a tin of kidney beans, a little less meat. If you make a soup, why not throw in some chickpeas? If you make a curry, again, you could throw in some chickpeas, some butter beans. So having a couple of recipes and just kind of experimenting with what works for you.
And I see there's a few comments coming in there in relation to menopause and weight gain. Weight gain in menopause, it's definitely one of the top five, probably if not top 10 symptoms that comes up a lot. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see them kind of going hand in hand, or what do you think?
For sure, yeah, it can be. And one of the reasons for that is because as we age, we tend to lose a bit of muscle mass. And muscle is so important because the more muscle we have, the higher our metabolism. So the higher our metabolism, the more calories we're burning, even if we're just sitting down. So if we start to lose muscle as we age and as we go through the menopause, the amount of calories that we need each day actually reduces. So if we're not reducing our overall calorie intake, it can make weight gain easier. So one of the really important things coming into menopause is to maintain that muscle mass, maintaining your
Mm,
muscles. And you can do that through exercise, particularly resistance training. So it doesn't have to be pushing up barbells in the gym. It can be light weights and resistance training to maintain your muscle. And then, like you said, about it's really important to keep your protein intake high to build your muscle and preserve your muscle. So weight gain is common in menopause, unfortunately, but there are things that we can do. It's certainly not easy,
mm.
but there, yeah.
Yeah. And so Marianne is just saying she cut her portion size in her dinner and exercise, and she's found that's really helped. I mean, weight gain and menopause, they do come hand in hand. I see it every day with women that I talk to. But I think exercise, oh my God, it's just so important for heart health, for weight gain, for mental health as well. The good hormone release that we get as well. But it's just essential, isn't it? For it ticks a lot of boxes.
Exactly. And even for bone health and that
Yeah,
resistance training as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
everything,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. When you look at that, when you look at weight, what's your thoughts in terms of how do I know that I'm maintaining for my age, for my height, that I'm maintaining the right weight? Um, is there an easy way to know that for people?
There is, I mean, you can use your BMI, which is your weight related to your height. So there'll be online calculators for BMI. They're not always, we can look at BMI. They can give us a good indicator. If your BMI is above kind of what they would consider a healthy BMI, it can be associated with health risks. But what's actually a better measure than BMI would be a measure of your waist circumference. So by this, I mean, if you took a measurement around your waist, just about an
Yeah.
inch above your belly button, if that is above 32 inches for women or 80
Okay.
centimeters, that would mean that you're at an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And the reason we
Okay.
measure the weight, you might see some women would say that they have a pear shape, and
Yeah.
they'd store most of their weight around their kind of hips
Yeah.
and their thighs. That's actually a very healthy body shape, because it means that any excess fat is sitting on our hips. So it's
Yeah.
not interacting with our organs. Whereas if it's around our waist, it's not just sitting there, it's surrounding kind of like our liver, our heart, it's surrounding those organs, and it is, pumping out hormones and chemicals and things. So can increase risk of diabetes, of heart disease, because it's not just sitting there. So that's why measuring your waist circumference can be a better measure than, you know, BMI.
Okay, that's really good. We'll all be running for the measuring tapes after this, just to see where we're at. But I like that because that's nice and practical too. It's kind of just makes it a bit easier, you know. Okay, there's loads of comments coming in there. I'll go back to them in a minute, but we'll just try and go through. What about just in terms of, we've mentioned kind of beans and so forth. Say, you know, you're at work, you're at home, you're having the cup of tea, you're chomping at the bit for some chocolate, but you're trying to hold yourself back. What's kind of some healthy snacks that you'd recommend that you could have during the day?
I mean, from a heart health point of view, nuts are a great one. And as part of, there's an overall very healthy diet pattern called the Mediterranean diet. We know that about 30 grams, or a small handful where you can close your hand, of plain unsalted nuts a day can lower your cholesterol, can lower your risk of cardiovascular disease. So nuts every day, great snack. Obviously, fruit is an excellent one, full of antioxidants, going to protect the lining of your blood vessels from damage. So, and full of vitamin C, different minerals. So fruit. Yogurt, whether it's a dairy yogurt or a calcium fortified alternative, is going to give you a portion of calcium for bone health. Obviously, a high protein snack like hummus, carrot sticks, they're all what I would call very healthy snacks. But sometimes that craving for chocolate, you know, what I always say is kind of looking at, where's that craving coming from? Is it, you know, are your energy levels now low? Have you eaten enough during the day? Is it kind of what I call an emotional craving? Like what need is that chocolate craving, or is it feeding, particularly in the evening? So while in theory the healthy snacks are going to be great, want to look at why we're craving maybe the sugary things. Yeah.
And what about dark chocolate? I now religiously every night I have my cup of mint tea and my 2 squares of dark chocolate. Is dark chocolate a no-no, or are we okay on that front?
It's fine. Dark chocolate is actually, you know, the higher the percentage can be maybe some health benefits, some antioxidant or something like that. So dark chocolate, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. On mine is 78%. Is that still a bit too low? Or
no, that's great.
I've tried the 85% and I've tried the 90%, and here it was just wasn't happening.
I think they say above 70% is pretty good.
Okay, yeah. Okay, all right, okay. And I guess like everything, it's in moderation, you know, that's the thing. Can we just touch on briefly alcohol and heart health?
Yep. So the recommendation for the best level of alcohol for heart health is 0. But realistically, the European Society of Cardiology, where we kind of get all our guidelines from.
Hello.
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 Sorry, I'm going to just check the mute. Go on. Oh, hang on a sec, Aisling. Sorry. Okay, I think I have it. Have I? I have to scroll through them all to find it. Sorry.
Everything about lies.
Yeah. Anyone? Oh, there we go. It's the last one. Is it? It won't let me mute it actually. Okay. Anyone not on mute, just mute yourself. Sorry, Aisling. Go on.
No problem. Yeah. So with alcohol, the Irish guidelines would be to have less than 14 units a week for women. Now, what a unit is 100 mils of wine. So that would be a small glass. Technically, that would mean a bottle of wine would have 7.5 glasses. So 100 mils wine, half a pint of beer, or 1 measure of spirits. So over a week, no more than 14 of those, and 2 days to be alcohol free. And the European guidelines, the new ones, say less than 10. So over a week, that would be just over a bottle of wine, maybe a bottle and 2 glasses, or 5 pints, or 10 measures of spirits over a week. So obviously alcohol is going to have an impact on
that still seems like a lot to me. Anyway, but
yeah, it can be, depending on, you know, individuals, that could be a lot, that could be very little.
Yeah.
One of the big things about alcohol is that it's going to have an immediate effect on blood pressure. So we'll immediately raise it, even though we might feel like alcohol, might be a de-stressor. A lot of people might have a glass of wine at the end of the day to de-stress. It's actually raising our blood pressure. It can disrupt our sleep. It can, affect our mood, relationships, overall health, weight. So it can be okay in moderation. But,
Yeah. It's like everything. Moderation is so important when it comes to our health, right? And that brings me on to caffeine.
Interesting about caffeine is there are some studies showing that caffeine can be protective, but it kind of depends on the person. Some people could have 5 cups of coffee a day, coffee before bed and feel fine, and then it won't affect them. So it's very much the individual in terms of caffeine, and the same with alcohol and women and menopause is that it can cause hot flushes. So and people can be more sensitive to it. So someone could have, say, coffee in the afternoon and it would still be affecting them, or it can trigger symptoms. So with caffeine it can be very individual, so you kind of have to know how it affects you.
Yeah, because like I have seen so many women in menopause where it does impact them, and it impacts the sleep. So yeah, I guess it's just kind of looking at your own tolerance. And I know for me, I can't tolerate coffee at all. I have one decaf coffee would be enough. Now I'll have a bit of tea, but it's decaf. It just doesn't work for me. So it's just individual. So just look at yourself and be conscious of it. Aisling, one last question, and this comes up a lot, and it's I've read a lot of there's a lot of research papers out in relation to this, and it just seems to be a grey area, is calcium tablets, and how calcium tablets can impact the buildup of plaque and can have a negative impact. What are your thoughts on that?
Like you said, it seems to be a very grey area. Calcium in high levels can harden those plaques in the artery, can stiffen blood vessels, and increase blood pressure, and so it's much. We do need it. We need it for bone health, to reduce risk of osteoporosis. Our needs increase after menopause, so I as a dietitian kind of prefer the food first approach, so trying to get it from foods. And with calcium, we absorb calcium much better when we have enough vitamin D. So often, it can be important, and it's important for everyone to have a vitamin D supplement, especially during the winter months, but especially to help absorption of calcium. One thing I would say, while you're trying to get calcium from food first, not to start any sort of supplement without talking to your GP, because they will check, your blood levels, and for a lot of supplements you mightn't need it. And with calcium, it's important to check with your GP, because they can recommend other things, because like you said, it's a bit of a gray area in terms of supplements.
And can you measure calcium? How can the GP measure calcium? Is that coming up in a standard blood result or a specific one?
To be honest, I'm not sure exactly. I know it will often come back, your calcium measurement in your blood in blood results, but I'm not exactly sure how it's measured.
Yeah, but there's a marker there anyway, so that's what they're obviously looking at as part of, I guess, a big thing we won't go on to bone health, but would be the DEXA scan, in terms of measuring your bone health, but that's another night.
DEXA scan, great if you can get it, but not everyone would have access to it, but that would be a good way of measuring bone health, as opposed to calcium on a blood test wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. So can I ask you one last question? Salts. So the way women can get more sensitive to salt, kind of through menopause. I think as you go through the perimenopause, menopause years, and post-menopause, is that a time, like, should we be even more conscious of our salt intake and reducing it, or what would you say?
Yeah, and I think the best thing would be to be conscious of our salt intake from a young age, because if we're
Okay.
used to having salt, we can develop a taste for it and a kind of a like for it. So the recommendations would be to have less than 5 grams of salt per day, but on average in Ireland and most European countries, we're having about 9 grams. So double the
Wow.
amount of what we should have. And for as an example, a single takeaway could have 9 grams of salt in it. So double the amount. You know, I picked up a packet of soup, it had 3 grams in it. So salt is pretty much in everything before we ever added the table.
Yeah.
As we get older, we know that kind of taste can diminish. We can get a stronger desire for salt, but also as we
Mhm.
age, because our blood vessels are stiffening and our blood pressure is increasing naturally, even if when we're younger our blood pressure was fine and we were eating salt and it was all fine, as we get older it's going to increase anyway. Our blood pressure will increase, and if we're still eating salt, it's going to just lead to our blood pressure increasing more. So definitely would try to reduce salt, definitely not adding it at the table, and then
Yeah.
maybe looking into reading food labels and seeing exactly what's in your food, because it's just in everything. It's very
Yeah.
hard to
Yeah. Yeah.
very hard to reduce it.
That's where like reducing processed foods where you can is really important. And what about pink Himalayan salt? Can you use that as a better substitute, or is it still salt?
It's still salt.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, okay. Still
pink,
doing the same
pink
thing.
salt. Still doing it, yeah. Still,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
also would say a common thing is people will ask about low salt or potassium salt, and we don't recommend them, especially if you have any kidney issues, or if you're over 60, avoid potassium or those low salts.
Okay.
Not good for
What
heart
are
health.
like low salts where you buy one that says it's a low salt or something, is it?
It'll say low, like LO salt, so they use potassium instead of sodium. So it's a
Okay.
potassium salt. You might have seen it like
Ah,
LO
okay.
salt, so we
Yeah.
don't recommend them.
Okay, okay, okay. Right, okay. And I guess that's where the potassium, when you're the electrolytes and stuff. All right, okay. That makes sense. I'm thinking of it from the point of view of when you're running and you're doing a lot of running and you're trying to replace what you're losing, it's potassium that you're trying to get back in, but in different forms. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Um,
potassium can be great for helping blood pressure, but finding any kind of fruits and vegetables. So like a banana after your run would be a
mm,
great way of
yeah,
replenishing
yeah.
potassium.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The banana. God, I live on bananas.
Great.
Okay, Aisling, there's loads of questions, but I think what we'll do, if it's okay, we're going to chat with Lisa, and then if you're okay, we might go. I think we're going to go over by a few minutes, but we might just go back and answer the questions then, if that's okay. Um,
Perfect.
I will just replace spotlight. Hey, Aisling or Lisa, sorry, how are
Hi,
you?
Catherine. Good. Thank you.
Um,
Thanks for having us.
oh no, it's brilliant, Scott. No, you're great. Thanks for making the time to come on. So one of the things, and any of the women that are here who are on my online course at the moment, I talk a huge amount about busyness, our busy lives, the stressors that we have every day, because they really add to what can be challenges in menopause. And I think when we come to, there's no bigger time in a woman's life, I think, than in menopause, where your health is just thrown up in front of you and you've got to kind of, pay attention to it or stuff. But can you just talk to us a bit about, in terms of, do you think women are taking heart health as a priority? What should we be doing?
That's a great question. So I suppose it's interesting, in a group like this where you have all very much committed to being interested in and focusing on engaging with your health. So that's wonderful. And you could kind of say across society at the moment, there's a huge amount of focus on health. It's kind of everywhere, from Instagram to the news, and people seem to be out and about so much. So it's great to see so much engagement with our health, and so much out there about health. And as the girls have said already, that is so important when it comes to heart health, because heart health, cardiovascular health, is a lifelong process. At the same time, though, it's never too late to turn our attention to the health of our hearts and to the things that we can do to take care of them. But I think it's fair to say that the data tells us that our heart health could be more of a priority. it can be overwhelming. There's a lot to it, as I think has really come across in the session so far. But across the population for men and women, and as Madeline really emphasised, it is just as important for women to be aware of their hearts as for men. But what we know are that things like blood pressure, for example, are not being prioritised. Because the data tells us that over 60% of people that are aged over 50 in Ireland are living with hypertension or uncontrolled high blood pressure. And of that group, about half of them don't know that they have high blood pressure, which can be dangerous if left that way for a long period of time. So important to be going to the GP, getting those yearly checkups as you've been talking about. And then of the group who do know that they have hypertension, about half their blood pressure is still elevated. And so that is complicated. There is a lot to it. And what I always say is that knowledge alone has never changed anyone's behavior. So it's more than knowing these things, the doing, the getting from knowing to doing, and taking control of our risk factors is complicated. So I think people are getting more and more aware. I think sessions like this are great, and we in Croi love being at sessions like this so that we can bring the awareness. But it gets more complicated when you talk about doing things differently, and especially that word "should" is such a tricky one, and can put a lot of pressure on us, and maybe almost even hold us back because of that pressure that we put on ourselves. But the reality is that doing things differently is hard. You're on mute there, Catherine, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like, my kids are hopping around here in the background, so I'm like, I've got to go on mute. But it's like, even say, Lisa, with COVID, that's been really tough on so many women, and on others not so. And it's kind of come with added complexities and stress and so forth. But it is like the vast majority, or a lot of women, end up juggling, like the way in menopause we talk about the sandwich years, where you might have aging children, you might have aging parents, and then you're in between, and you've got work, life, menopause, and you're trying to juggle it all, and that's hard. Is there what kind of tips would you give just in terms of trying to manage that stress on a daily basis, to look
Absolutely.
after yourself?
For sure. And I think one of the things that we're very often in Croi is how difficult people, particularly women, find it to take some time for themselves, to find the headspace to think about doing things differently and minding themselves at all. So, as we all know, stress is a normal part of life. And you've mentioned that menopause can be a particularly stressful time in life for a lot of really good reasons, from the hormonal changes that come about, as well as from the stress that can come from the symptoms that are associated with menopause, and then those kind of life stage things that you mentioned. Stress is such an interesting one because it's so many things. Stress is both a stimulus and a response. So things outside of ourselves are stressful. Traffic is stressful. Work can be stressful. But then we also talk about stress in terms of our experience of stress. So we can label things like tension or experience stress as things like tension or headaches or pain or sleeping a lot or not sleeping enough. So it presents itself in a lot of ways. So although it is important to keep reminding ourselves that a bit of stress is good, and some of us thrive on stress, it's like blood pressure, one of the big themes of the evening. We all have stress, we all have blood pressure, but as if stress like blood pressure gets too high, it's time to do something about it. And so some important places to start, I suppose, are with awareness. We often normalize stress in our lives. We kind of say, I have nothing to be given out about. Other people have it much harder than me. But starting by becoming aware of what is stressful in our lives, what we find stressful, is a really important place to start. How do we personally experience stress? These things are going to be totally different from person to person, and no one else can tell us what is or isn't stressful, and we can't tell anyone else what is or isn't stressful. And then, sorry.
I think, sorry, just one thing on that, Lisa. I think the other thing is we don't want stress to become a stressor. That we start getting stressed over, over God, I'm stressed, and I think that's one that I just see that with some people in terms of you start talking about it, and you just have to. I just think it's really just try and stand back a little bit and just like I always say one small change every week, just even a 2-3 minute change, mindfulness for like 4 or 5 minutes a day, even once a week. Just start small, because if you start looking at if you look at everything in one swoop, that can be overwhelming, and particularly in menopause.
Yeah, so true. And some of that I think comes down to not using enough language. Instead of saying, if you find yourself saying I'm stressed a lot, it'd be interesting to try not allowing yourself to say the word stressed and to pick a different word. So you might actually be angry or frustrated or tired or uncertain or worried or distracted about something. And it's helpful to use different and more language, because that signposts you to what's actually bothering you, which may help you to do something about it. So you're right, we overuse the word stress. It doesn't mean that we're not experiencing something that needs a bit of attention. So trying to broaden our kind of emotional vocabulary is a really good step. And as well, I suppose, as increasing our awareness of what is stressful in our lives and how we experience stress, paying a bit of attention to what we do in response to stress is important as well. So our coping strategies, what are the things that we do to help us to feel better at stressful times? And, as you said, Catherine, because life is busy and we can kind of be running around after ourselves a lot of the time, we're not necessarily that aware of what we do in response to stress, what our coping strategies are. And again, it's important to start with that awareness so that we can see about maybe ways that our coping strategies aren't helping ourselves to actually cope with the stress, but importantly, aren't helping us in terms of our heart health. I suppose I've said a few too many things there now, so I've confused myself. But in relation to the heart health point, if you've got a lot on, you're very stressed, or whatever word you want to use, but you've got a lot on, it's much harder to make some of the choices, say, that Aisling might have described to us. It's much harder to pass up the 2 biscuits with a cup of tea. It's much harder to make a sauce from scratch as opposed to using something from a packet. When you're bothered, you're stressed, you have a lot on your plate, and a build-up of those kinds of choices, maybe skipping your walk or skipping your gym session if you've had an argument with someone, or you're bothered about something, over time, those kinds of approaches to coping with stress cannot be helpful to us in terms of their stress, but also in terms of our heart health. So being aware of how we respond to stress is really important. The stress is still there, and the stress is difficult. That is the case. But increasing our awareness and adding in those things like you mentioned, Catherine. So things like a bit of meditation, if that sounds good to you, a bit of exercise, even if you really don't feel like it, a bit of yoga, dancing around your living room to shake off the tension, calling your friend to have a good rant. These things seem really minor, but in response to the different stressful things that we experience, these things can be beneficial over time. They, as you said, totally correct. They help us to step back, get a bit of space, see the wood from the trees.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? And I talk a lot about stress and a lot about the next one I'm going to ask about is sleep. But I just think with stress, I think we've you know, we've got to just acknowledge it, but at some way too, just not to become just, I guess, that it doesn't become another stressor. You know, it's
Great
and
point.
look for just the small things that help. You know, I'm a huge fan of mindfulness and meditation. I do it every day, and it makes such a difference to me. And I always kind of say you don't have to be Buddha sitting up on a mountain. You know, it can just be, you know, just being present, watching the birds sitting under a tree, or just using any of the apps, and just 5-10 minutes. Our brains are so busy, we just need to give them a break, right? And just in relation to the sleep, does sleep impact our heart health, and how is that if it does?
So firstly, there is a link between our sleep and our heart health, but unfortunately, there isn't enough evidence on what the actual pathway is. So the kind of most recent evidence, which comes from those European Society of Cardiology guidelines that Aisling mentioned, tells us that sleep disturbance, so things like trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or sleeping a lot over a period of time, or having kind of very extreme fluctuations in the amount of time you're sleeping. So maybe your lifestyle, as a lot of people can experience, can fluctuate between not enough sleep, you know, less than 5 or 6 hours sleep a night, to a lot more than that. Those extremes are associated with risk to our cardiovascular health. So sleep is a really interesting one, and it's very individual. It's very determined by our genetics. So the evidence is a bit all over the place, and it's hard to kind of nail things down, but it does seem that extremes aren't good for our heart health over time.
So that's difficult then for women who are shift workers, of which menopause comes with more challenges when you are a shift worker, or can do in terms of symptoms and so forth. So I guess that kind of unknown territory in relation to sleep kind of adds to that. There's loads of lovely comments here, Lisa, just in terms of great tips and so forth. So I think let's just, if it's okay, I'll just go back through. I know we're just over time, but if everyone's okay to stay on, I'm just going to go back through the questions. And I have to say a lovely thanks to Ruth Brennan, Ruth, who I know very well. She's shared some great articles and everything there. So hopefully everyone's gotten a chance to download those and have a look at them. Okay, we talked about the oils. Let's see. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to. We did that. Kept that. Statins made me very ill. Do natural statins work? I don't know, Madeline. Maybe you'd like to answer that one. Sorry, I'll.
Yeah, so there's a real wide range of natural statins that are available, and you have the likes of plant stenols. Aisling would have been a good one for that, but the plant stenols would have always been there to promote the reduction in your cholesterol. I would say, similar to when we talked about earlier of how soon do you check your cholesterol afterwards. Have a cholesterol before you start for example, if you choose the plant stenols, you take your cholesterol reading before you start it, and check then within that 6 to 12 weeks of starting it, if you've been taking them routinely over that time, and recheck your cholesterol again, and then see, does it work for you? Because it's very, I suppose when you're going towards the natural products, it's very different. Some people will tolerate them in different ways. So I would, you know, again, it's another conversation with your GP to say, this is the route that I want to go down. Check it at the beginning, set yourself a time frame, and recheck your bloods then towards the end to see if you're starting to see that decline and if it's working for you. Because again, what works for one will not work for another.
Yeah, very good. And I'll just read this comment. Love that point. Women walking and running the roads instead of resistant training and eating sufficient protein, they're left with lower metabolic rates, weight gain, and frustration. I think that was just in relation to Aisling when we were talking about that. Okay. Sorry. Reduced caffeine for me meant reduced inflammation and better sleep. Yeah, I'd totally be behind that one. If you can't make calcium because of no thyroid, does it still impact negatively? So your body isn't producing calcium, but I'm presuming you're taking a calcium supplement or eating foods fortified with calcium, I would have thought. Am I reading that question right? I'm not sure. Mary, if you'd like to put in a comment, and maybe I'm picking it up the wrong way. I could be. Okay, we talked about the Himalayan salt. This is such a great point Lisa is making. With depression and low motivation and perimenopause, and it seems impossible to do what is needed exercise and diet wise. And I guess that's the conundrum. But as Lisa was saying, even if you can just do a small walk, make it small and more manageable. Mindfulness saved me. Great tips. Oh, thanks, Ruth. Okay. So I'm going to just go back up to Mary's question. Gosh, sorry, I just find it now. So yeah, I'm presuming that is in relation to calcium. I would imagine. Sorry, I'm just going to try for whoever's not on mute there. I'm imagining there that if you're not making calcium, that you must be taking it in some other form, whether through a supplement or not. I'm not sure. One kind of, and Aisling, sorry, I don't know if we touched on this or maybe we did, was the impact I was saying earlier to Madeline. I was reading a paper on magnesium and how magnesium foods can be of great benefit, and that's where you mentioned like the nuts and seeds and so forth, which will all contain magnesium. But that's certainly a good food group to add into your diet, isn't it? Because we find a lot of people are deficient in magnesium as well, or can be.
So nuts would be a great source: spinach, wholemeal bread, kind of for magnesium.
Yeah. Oh, hang on now. Sorry, there's some more here. My good cholesterol is very high. Is that an issue? That's good, isn't it?
That's your HDL that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And that's a really positive thing because it has protective values for you. And as I said, the higher you can get your good cholesterol, it can help to reduce the bad cholesterol. So it's a good thing.
And did you mention, is that where it's over 1, is it? Or
yes, if we can raise it up above 1.
Okay, great. Okay, God, I must check my results now, see what I'm at. Like a detective. If you had a cardiac event that was in the 20% non-preventable category, are you at risk of other cardiac events?
I suppose yes would be the answer, because just because it happened once doesn't mean that it couldn't happen again, and naturally you'd still have the same risk profile as anybody else. So you'd follow the same kind of cardiovascular health lifestyle as anybody else to try and reduce that risk.
Yeah, so it's going back to the fact, oh God, it's so individual. And like I always say, this menopause is so individual because every person's experience of menopause is going to be different. And like we haven't even, touched, like we've kept this general in terms of heart health, but heart health, if you have early menopause, is it's different again. There's added complications depending on different forms of menopause and so forth. Some lovely comments coming through there, thanking you all for your time. You're very welcome, everyone. Just another question: have family history of heart disease. Dad died at 50. I'm on a statin, but I'm very tired. Madeline, what would you recommend there?
Yeah. I guess because of the age, unfortunately, that your dad sadly died at such a young age, that a family history is a strong a risk factor for you. Now, with family history, like I said, you can't change that, and there's nothing fatalistic about that. It just means that you're conscious of it and you continue to screen. So you were just saying that you were very tired. Again, I'd go back to that type of symptoms diary. Is it just tired? Are there other symptoms that you're feeling? You know, don't leave it too long. If this has been going on for a while, gather, you know, over a few days, or take your week and make sure that you go back to the GP and investigate.
Yeah.
It's
And I
all
think
just
it's
not
just
sitting on anything for too long. If you feel you've been feeling like that for a very long time, well, that's not right, and it's worth investigating more. It's hard for me to say, not having a full picture, but to sit with your GP is important.
And I think I would just add to that, because you know, I just know this from working with so many women, that you know, trust your gut, you know your body. And if you feel that there's something more and you just want to get it investigated and, you know, get the bloods done again or whatever, just make those appointments, because it is important. We can often spend a lot of time worrying or ruminating about some aspect of our health, whereas in actual fact, if you go and have X, Y, or Z test done, or blood test, it might turn out that it's nothing at all. And I'm a firm believer in, if you have an inkling of a worry about something, just go and get it investigated, because there's no, you know, it's adding, you know, a little bit more stress for you to go off and waste time potentially worrying about things, you know.
Definitely get ahead of it.
Yeah. We'll take, there's lovely comments coming in, so I'll try and copy them and send them to you tomorrow, girls. So just another one: is there a link between thyroid, goitre, and cholesterol levels? And I'm sure I've pronounced that wrong.
Yes, there is. And when your thyroid is unsettled, your cholesterol can often be unsettled. So we wouldn't, obviously you always remain conscious of your cholesterol and the things that you can do to reduce it, but until your thyroid is settled, we wouldn't make a judgment call on what we need to do next with your cholesterol. So you need your thyroid levels to be settled and maintained before we would act on ever prescribing anything other than lifestyle measures for your cholesterol. Unless, of course, Catherine, again, we're looking at these questions isolated, unless there's other reasons and other risk factors why it's important to act earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what it's after it again.
Okay, look, there's so much information. I do know my lovely friend Ellie Ball from Heyday is hoping to watch the replay, and she might put an article together just focusing in on top kind of practical information and so forth. But Aisling, Lisa and Madeline, thanks so much, because for ye, I know it probably just, this is information that you're living with and you're probably sharing it every day, but for people, you know, if you're not hearing it like this, it's gold. It really is. It's invaluable, because it just, even, you know, as you said earlier, Madeline, if we take away one or two pieces of information, that's important, you know. And it's kind of like, you know, just picking the red kidney beans, you know, maybe over something else, and just making different food choices when it comes to shopping trolley and exercising are so important. Look, thanks a million for taking the time tonight, and I will have the recording, and hopefully, you're welcome, Joan. Thanks for all your lovely comments. And I'll get the recording, and hopefully I'll get it up on the blog over the weekend, and we can share it with everyone. And I don't know if you noticed earlier, but my account did hit 100. And it did. And I was getting emails coming through saying, can't get in. And I did look briefly at Zoom to try and extend, and I thought, this is just going to be too much. Too much hassle. So that's great anyway. But look, everyone will get the replay, so that's handy. So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening, and tomorrow's Friday. I love Friday.
Thanks for having us.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Good night.